I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I usually, it's nice to meet you face to face, and I would encourage you to reach out to me either through Ditto or through my MIT Media Lab address. Is the audio reasonable, or is it too echoey right here?
It's good. It's good, David.
Okay, great. I'd love to share with you what I hope is a provocative, sort of eye-opening look at the future of user-generated content. 2 years ago, I started a company out of the Media Lab called Ditto, and what we're doing is I think, really a response to how photos are becoming so primary in how we communicate today. And that primacy of photos is also driving an urgency on the part of companies that are doing, quote, social listening, to listen to photos rather than listening to text. I know that sounds a little cheesy, but I think you know what I mean. So if you can see this first slide is sort of a summary of the problem, which is there are people that are posting 1.8 billion photos a day. Some of them look like this, where people have captions that are as informative as Happy Danny and Hallie. But there are products and there is information embedded in those photos that brands would like to know about. And when we analyze how many photos that we find through the technology of visual search or image recognition, only a small slice, 15% or less, could be found through doing a text search. So that sort of represents the problem. If you go to the next slide, there's a screenshot from an article that came out last year in the Wall Street Journal about Ditto that sort of shows you all of the facets of the photos that we read. So we look for the presence of faces in photos because often a smile is indicative of a mood. We look for the presence of products in photos, of types of clothing, of logos, which in some ways are the easiest thing to identify because they're designed to be different, and the context of use. So this guy is obviously wearing, outdoor gear at a ski place, and so you can see, based on the scene behind him, the context in which products are used. Is everyone nodding? Good. I will take, if people have urgent questions as I go along, I'd love to, maybe Kim, you can sort of help by interrupting. But otherwise, I'd just love to show you sort of what the capabilities of the tool are and how brands and agencies are using the product and sort of get people's reactions to this capability. So if you go to the next slide, there was a piece that was written in the New York Times last year about how Ditto helped Kraft Macaroni and Cheese understand how people are using the product sort of by looking at these photos in the wild and seeing, that people are eating Kraft mac and cheese and as almost like a celebration with wine sometimes, and it's not just the snack food for kids that they had previously thought. If you go to the next slide, you can also see that Ad Age believes that this is a blind spot or a black box for marketers, and there's a nice potential to unlock this for brands. If you go to the next slide, you can see the growth in social media photos and photo sharing has just continued to skyrocket. I mean, back in, I was one of the first people to get a patent on uploading a photo to the web and inviting your friends, but that was back in 1996 when it was a ridiculous idea. But now with the presence of camera phones and also wearable cameras like life logging cameras, we can see that this proliferation of image sharing is just skyrocketing. 1.8 billion photos are not taken per day, they're shared every day. So this represents a big new signal for brands. If you go to the next slide, you can see there's this constellation of brands that we've trained the system to recognize in photos. So now I think we're up to about 5,000 brands or so. If you go to the next slide, you can see some examples of what we see in photos. So obviously there are lots of sports brands that are shared. There are quick service brands like quick service restaurant brands. And what we've taken 2 years to work on perfecting is this idea of capturing just the corner or the edge. You can see the Boston Bruins brand in this photo. It's not the entire brand. It's really incidental. Like, no one took a picture of this consciously to picture the Boston Bruins, but that just happened to be part of the photo. If people want to try a live demo, they can go to streamditto.com, and you can pick a category like coffee or beverages or fashion or restaurants, and you can see a live stream of photos as they're coming through our system from Twitter and Tumblr and Instagram, which are the three biggest sources of public photos. So we do this legally, of course, and while we don't ask people's explicit permission to look at photos, we only look today at photos that are public photos. But that still is a huge signal of photos. So go ahead and try that and see what you can see and see what's happening right now. This is for the sort of most technical of the discussion. I just want to highlight that there are the machine learning community, in sort of a sub-part of computer science, has really improved the quality of what we can see and the precision at which we can, if we say we think it's a Jim Beam logo, we're right 99% of the time now. So it's sort of amazing what machine learning has done to this industry. But left to right on this diagram, which says Ditto continuously processes photos for brands and faces and smiles and more to compile a database of affinities. We ingest photos from all these public sources, or we have an API. So some of our customers push photos at us, and then we read those photos for them. So there's a company based in California, you can look them up, called Gum Gum. It's sort of a funny name. But they push 5 million photos a day to our servers, and then we say, oh, that's a fashion brand, that's a beer, that's a car, that's a celebrity. And then they place advertisements either on the photo or adjacent to the photo with the knowledge of what's in the photo. So we're sort of agnostic in terms of where the photos come from. We pre-process them. We detect features like logos or characters or flags. And then we have this pipeline of what are called classifiers. So some of these are fairly technical terms, but HOG is called hierarchy of gradients. That's one technique that we use for determining things like blobby logos, like Pepsi, McDonald's, and Nike are sort of these gross blobby logos. And then we also look for things like facial expressions and faces using different techniques. So there's this whole cascade of ways of reading an image. And then we validate that, and then at the end of the day, we have this big database of who in the world is interested in what. So you could almost think of this, Forrester Research calls this the database of affinities. And this is you're into beachy vacations, he's into taking pictures of interior design, she's into cars, he's into food, you just sort of have this big database of who in the world is interested in what. And actually, I'm on my way out to fly to Seattle tonight to talk to Amazon, because Amazon is already using these social signals to personalize shopping. So this learning through photos is something that big brands are really interested in doing. If you go to the next slide, you can see some of the non-brand gross classifiers that we use. The term in the industry now is called deep learning. So what we do is we train on a set of smiling images to determine smiles or glasses or fabric patterns or shoes or animals or scenes to be able to recognize all of these types of things with more or less precision. And if you go to the next slide, you can see, we trained on Vera Bradley bags so that we could find Vera Bradley bags in the wild for that brand. And if you go to the next slide, so this is revealing what people eat. Go to the next slide, what people wear. Go to the next slide, what people watch, where people shop. Go to the next slide. And ultimately, we found over the course of talking to many customers, there's sort of three big uses for this type of data mining. The first one is to answer this ethnographic question of how is my product actually being used in the wild? Companies have done focus groups and surveys and sort of lots of hands-on techniques to try to find the answer to this question about actually in the world, how and when and in what context is my product used. The second question is much more about accounting. So brands want to know how often are people sharing photos of my brand versus my competitors. And for inside of some geographic area like the West Coast, or inside of some demographic like teenage women, or inside of some time slice like late at night, are people having more Ben & Jerry's ice cream or more Haagen-Dazs, for example? So that's sort of the second use case. And the third use case is maybe the most creepy and provocative, which is now you have a database of who your fans are as derived through photos. So that's that can be exciting as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Can I just poll? Are people with me?
Yeah, we're on the edge of our seat, waiting for what's next.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about sort of what the categories of companies are that are using this. So go to the next slide, is slide 17. So what we're finding is for the biggest reception for this is consumer packaged good brands who really want to see how their products are used and adjacent to what other products. The sports brands we found are maybe the easiest to identify, but maybe the best use case for that is like Manchester United. We worked with them to find far-flung fans because they wanted to know who are the fans, not only the ones that are coming to the games because they already have a database of those, but also who is interested in Manchester United who live in Hong Kong or India, and there's large populations of people there. The fashion brands are very interested in, we just were talking to Louis Vuitton this morning, and they're very interested in monitoring sort of how they're doing versus their competitors. So Michael Kors really wants to know, am I beating out Coach bags or am I not beating out Coach bags? The beverage companies obviously want to know sort of who's using the product and what are they mixing it with. Quick service brands are have a huge voracious appetite, not to make a pun, for all of this data. And even auto brands and consumer electronic brands. We just worked with Samsung on finding pictures of phones that were shattered because that represented an opportunity to swoop in and sell people a new Galaxy. That sort of it's an opportunity to find the moment where people are most susceptible to a message about switching. So if you look at our tool, and I can give people access to the tool if they want, they can go to startditto.com to try it, and I can set up a student account and load it up with a bunch of brands. But the fast way of going through this is just to sort of cruise through these next slides. But this is what companies are paying a couple $1,000s a month to see their brand, and then incremental money to see their competitors' brands. And what we show them are the photos themselves, and then go to the next slide. And these photos are sortable by how popular they are, what the influence of the person that posted them is through clout, where they come from in the world, which social network they're coming from, et cetera, how many times they're retweeted. Go to the next slide. This shows you the profile shots of those people that are posting, so it gives you sort of a snapshot of the audience. Go to the next slide. You can see there's a graph that shows you week by week or day by day how many people posted the photo that contained the brand, how many people saw that, and how many people engaged with those photos. And then you can compare like McDonald's versus Wendy's versus Burger King.
David,
and then, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. We have a question on Twitter. It is
Sure.
Wondering if it is okay for brands to use Ditto's public photos without checking with the people involved.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think certainly for the first two use cases, it's kosher, right? So for the use case of learning from people, like learning what people do and how people use a product, I think that's fine, and that's certainly sort of a fair use. Just as you would position someone like in a mall or in a playground to look at how people are using strollers made by various companies. Like, that's just an observational task. I think comparing numbers is certainly fine without people's permission. You know, this many more people posted photos of McDonald's versus Coke. I think the direct engagement is one where today there's a sort of an emerging workflow, if you will, for asking people to reuse the photo that contains a brand on the company's Facebook page or photo wall, or in some context where the company is using that almost as a native advertisement. So in that case, companies are recognizing with Ditto that the brand exists in the photo. They're tweeting at the person, or they're adding something in Instagram in the comments section saying, "Hey, that's a great photo of you and your golden retriever. Can we use that for Purina Puppy Chow?" And then the person has to reply back like #OK or some other explicit acknowledgement for them to reuse the photo.
So,
Does that
David,
answer the question?
Another question from me. Does your technology allow for, in the aggregate, data on, call it gender, age, ethnicity? Do you roll up data like that?
Today, if you go to the next slide, what we do is something called affinities. So what we say is for people that had some brand, let's say McDonald's, in their photos, you can see across all other categories, are those people more likely or less likely to have any other brand or product or service in their photos? So what you find are things like that people that have Samsung in their photos are more likely to have sports logos. You know, that's sort of Samsung is one of the sportiest of the consumer electronics brands. Or North Face is one of the most consumer electronics of the fashion brands. You see what I mean? So you get these affinities where you can say this population differs from a general population in these ways. In terms of specific, we don't have access. We have access to where people say they're from in Twitter, for example. We don't have access to their age, their ethnicity, and their gender. Although there are companies like DataSift that will provide that data, and we could correlate those. Let's go on. I'm a little bit on the home stretch in terms of sort of finishing the story, and then I'd love to take more questions. So if you go to the next slide, this maybe it says slide 24, download the user IDs of your most influential fans for ad targeting or engagement. So this, I think, is sort of the brave new world of advertising, where you, rather than choosing a demographic slice like men aged 18 through 32 who live in these geos, these parts of the world. Instead, with a tool like Ditto, you can have a list of people who have the brand in their photos. So in a way, you can start to not only understand who the people are that are using the product, but also you can reach out to them on a one-to-one basis. So Twitter has a new advertisement mechanism. It parallels something that Facebook has been doing for a while, but it's called Twitter Tailored Audiences. So you can download the list in the top right of this slide. You can see 65,000 people have McDonald's in their photos recently. So you can download that list as an Excel file and then upload it into Twitter. And if you're Burger King, you can just prospect against the people who have McDonald's in their photos, which is a really new, potentially powerful / frightening way of doing advertising. But just imagine, the world next year will be, I think it'll be more commonplace that if you're holding, a Corona, you may get a coupon from some other product company because of what you show that you're doing in the world. Maybe we can take that up as whether that's good or whether that's the inevitable trend in personalization and good for the world, or frightening. But the last two views, if you go to analyze what people say about the photos, there's a word cloud that's generated by the hashtags that are underneath all the photos for McDonald's, for example. So they can do hashtag analysis. And then there's also a map that's given for every brand, so you can see where is certain product usage popular. So just to pop up a level, on slide 27, there's a slide that says brand and agency relationships accelerate enterprise software deals. So it's sort of this, I think there's an interesting business model question that we've had for the last 2 years, which is, okay, so you have this capability. Do you try to license it to the big social platforms so Pinterest can start doing advertising? Or do you go one step down the value chain and make a long list of these 500 plus companies that are doing text-based listening today, from Sprinkler, who I just got email before this call that Sprinkler has now raised $45 million. They're worth over $1 billion. Adobe, Salesforce is huge. Oracle, Brandwatch we have a deal with. All of these companies have been doing text listening for the same reasons that photos are interesting. And they have a laundry list of thousands of brands that they sell those software tools to. So Ditto could power photos into those software tools. Or we could take a step down the value chain and sell to the agencies that are buying those text listening tools and just sell them this photo listening tool that I just showed you. Or we could go after the brands that the agencies serve and try to get, we got an award from Kraft and we've been working with them. So why don't we just build a big sales force of people that go after the brands directly? Or should we do all three of those? Should we go after the social listing guys and the agencies and the brands? I don't know. If it were your company, what would you do? That's sort of the question. Obviously, you make more money if you can get brand relationships, but those are harder to penetrate. That you have to hire more expensive salespeople and go to more expensive conferences to get a meeting with Nestle or Campbell's than you do to get into an agency or to sell to these other tool companies. Does anybody want to respond to that question?
Hi, Chad Martin here. I'm with actually the agency, part of the WPP group, VML. So I guess if I were you, I'd go to brands because that's where the decision's actually made. I met somebody from VML out at South by Southwest, and I think we're coming down to present to the VML New York in a couple of weeks. But that's interesting because I think you're right that a lot of the decisions are made with brands, but those relationships are often heavily guarded by the agencies. And isn't it your sense that it's hard to just give Kimberly Clark's social media monitoring group a call and say, "Hey, we've got a new tool, and you should take the meeting"?
Hi, I absolutely love this. This is really exciting, especially as a data-driven marketer. In my opinion, I would actually go for an API integration with perhaps the program level, so Salesforce, the Oracles, the CRM systems, because I can see linking that data with what you have internally being very beneficial.
Good. Well, we do think that's our ultimate destiny is the API integration. We've done 6 of those deals this quarter. They're not all public, but I think the ones that are public are Trax, and I think Crimson Hexagon is also public. But yeah, as we go and talk to all of these, Brandwatch is also public. So as we go and talk to all of these companies in that sort of middle column there, they obviously need a photo strategy, and they're not going to build an image recognition team in a couple of years from scratch. So we're trying to make the pricing very attractive for them so that they can buy, a bundle of brands for a few $100s per brand per month, and then they can mark that up and sell it to the agencies and to the brands that they already have thousands of relationships with. I think my entrepreneurial spidey sense was that you really have to pick one and do it well. But I think in this case, this is such a nascent this ability to read photos is so new that it really is going to take a lot of money to educate all the brands and agencies. So that's one of the reasons why we sort of took this powered by strategy, so that we can let Brandwatch tell their 2,000 clients like P&G and Unilever about the functionality. And then we're confident we can develop more functionality over time that will allow us to go direct to those brands and agencies.
Well, and I think the other thing is that the brands might appreciate a little protection from, since it's new and it's could be perceived potentially as kind of invasive, and if you were at the agency level, the brands, can always blame the agency when something doesn't work.
Right. Good point. Let me walk you through the sort of last three or two ideas. One, if you go to the slide 28, one of the things that we've just done in the last month is to spin up our own index that only we can power, called Visual Brand Power, that allows people to see what is the impact of their brand in social. So what we've done here on this sort of comparing beer brands is we've looked at what is the share of photos that we see in the category that contain their brand. So Corona, as you can see, really dominates compared to their market share in the category. So the blue bar is the percent of photos, and the gray bar is the percent of revenue. And so you can see that some of these are fairly equal. Like you would expect that if there's a brand as powerful as Budweiser, that they should have that share of photos in people's photos, that share of logos in people's photos. But it's not even, because you can see that Corona is really, there's a big difference between their photo share and their market share, which is great for Corona. And then Busch sort of has the opposite problem on the far right, where you expect them, they have a very large market share, but nobody's posting photos of Busch. So the
David,
difference between,
any clues as to why? If I had to guess, it would be because when you're at the beach, you need to drink and photograph Corona.
Well, I think it signals whether it's an aspirational brand or whether it's a utilitarian brand in some ways. Like you want to be pictured with the Corona, and you're not like we went for the cheap beer, woohoo. So if you divide those two numbers, if you go to the photo share divided by the market share, this is what we are calling brand power. And if you go to brand power, or I guess it's visualbrandpower.com, you can see we're calculating these things for a number of categories. This is a snapshot of some of the quick service restaurants. So Domino's and Chick-fil-A are doing a great job. Wendy's and McDonald's are sucking it.
We have another minute or so. Questions?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to take a question, but I'd also love to just show you what I think the future of user-generated content looks like.
Perfect.
So if you go to the next slide with the chevrons, which is the trajectory of uses for UGC. So I think we're really at stage one today. We're just trying to find the stuff. We're trying to organize it for brands, and we're trying to measure it for brands. And the next step will be to reuse these photos in ways that accelerate e-commerce. And we're starting to see companies like Olapic, Percolate, Bizarre Voice do this, where they will manually go out and try to find photos of, let's say, do you know the cooler brand called Yeti? So they'll try to find not the pro shots of Yeti coolers, but they'll try to find like people hunting and fishing with Yeti coolers, and they'll make a little carousel on Walmart sites for Yeti cooler, and they'll see the sales increase of Yeti coolers by 6 or 8% because of these authentic photos that sort of prove that people love these coolers. So that's sort of an exciting use of UGC. Now, I think the context for that will shift into shoppable on social. And by that, I mean these photos will be, these 1.8 billion photos that are shared every day, which can't be manually tagged, will be automatically tagged by Ditto and others so that they become clickable, they become actionable. And Twitter and Tumblr are both enabling this with buy buttons on tumbles and on tweets, or on blogs and on tweets. So if you go to the next two slides, you can sort of see an example of the, Tumblr has a buy or a pledge or a get involved button directly on the blog post. And the next slide shows Twitter's announcement last year to test a buy button. And I think ultimately what this means is that your social stream becomes an e-commerce catalog. And that's where these things get monetized. And I don't know if that's sort of good for the world or not good for the world, but I think, this is advertising takes a totally different shape if it's social, peer-to-peer recommendations and actionability directly on what your friends do.
David?
Yes.
I think we're going to stop here because we have another virtual presenter standing in the green room. So people know how to get a hold of you based on the information you gave, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Please reach out to me with questions and tweet about Ditto Labs. Thank you.